Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, Neighbor Sabotaged My Property and Created Massive Flooding While Trespassing. Huge Mistake. TLDR. Insane neighbor constantly trespasses on my property with his sons. He destroys my trees and flowers for no apparent reason when I am at work, so I don't see him. He also removes rocks that I put around a shared eroding lake so it would flood onto my property. I catch him one day and call the cops only to find that the land needs to be surveyed. Turns out I own the entire pond and now the thing he wants the most will be taken away. Besides the fines for trespassing, I put an entire fence around the pond so that only I can use it. He tried to mess with me and now he lost the one thing that he was doing all of this to get. I like in a decently sized property and at one end of it is a lake that is at least partially on my property. The other side of the lake is owned by an older man who has 3 sons that live with him. I didn't mind sharing the lake since it seemed stable and big enough for everyone. The problem was that when the man-made lake was originally built long before I moved to the property it wasn't made perfectly. I am no expert on these things but over the years it has been slowly eroding the area around it and the water comes onto the land. Now as for our neighbors I don't know much about the sons, but the old man is 100% insane. I wish I met him before I moved in because that might have given me a clue that living here was a bad idea. For a long time, things seemed to happen randomly and with no natural explanation. Flowers would die in a way that was consistent with poison and even old oak trees would seem to get tampered with. I know that he was behind it because nobody else lives here and the trees had drill holes in them before they ended up dying and needing to be taken down for safety. The biggest issues with him though came with the pond. Due to erosion, we had gotten stones and put it around as a way to contain everything. Those seemed to vanish whenever my wife and I left for work. There were also traces of shovels being used to actually lower the waterline even more. So, one day when a small storm hit the lake water basically flooded a good chunk of my land, including my shed. I had no idea what this guy's problem was with me, but I was going to catch him this time. I was done playing nice and I knew that if I could catch him and his sons on my property doing something wrong I could call the police. One morning I pretended to go to work when really I came back a few minutes later and got into my hunting gear. This way I could easily blend into the area near the lake without being seen. The only difference being instead of holding a gun and waiting to spot deer I was holding a camera and waiting to see my neighbor. I guess with a camera it is still considered taking a shot, so the outfit felt relevant still. I knew he was going to come because I had just planted some fresh vegetables and even got new stones to put around my side of the lake. He took the bait perfectly and before I knew it I saw them rolling up on my property with a tractor. At least now I had the answer of how they were moving these giant rocks across the entire lake because we all knew they weren't going through it with those things. I took some pictures and called the cops about trespassers on my property. It takes a long time for them to steal the rocks and while they ignored the vegetables they actually did start messing around with another one of my trees. The cops eventually showed up and they looked like deer in the headlights. When they saw me with a camera though I think they realized they were in a whole lot of trouble. They got arrested for trespassing onto my property and attempted theft. As well as destruction of property for the one tree I had a photo of them drilling a hole into. They really couldn't think of much of a defense, but they were able to pull the only one they could think out of their ass. The old man claimed that the entire lake was on his side of the property line and so he wasn't trespassing at all. Now I never actually had the land surveyed so I honestly have no idea where the line is. My assumption was that it was somewhere in the middle of the lake, but I had no idea. I was sure though that at least where we were standing was my property and once I proved it they were going to get in a ton of trouble. Until then both of us were ordered to stay away from the area in general so there wouldn't be problems until the report came back. I was at work when the guy came, and I was so busy that I hadn't been checking in to find out what day he came. We got the report back though and the results shocked me. I was wrong in thinking the property line was in the middle of the lake. Instead, the property line was showing that I owned the entire lake. It turns out because of how it was built and the erosion the lake had slightly moved over the years little by little. So, when it was building, the property line was somewhere in the middle, but now it was fully on my property. The only thing that could have been better was if I got to see this insane neighbor face when he got those results. So now the entire lake was mine, and he knew messing with me anymore would cause him to get arrested. Still, it didn't feel like enough after all the damage he had done. I had only gotten him for one act of trespassing, attempted theft, and damaging my property. He had done so much more than that to me though, and caused a lot of damage with the flood that could have been easily avoided. I knew that I wasn't going to feel any better until I got some good old-fashioned revenge for myself. I didn't want to do anything to get myself in trouble, but I wanted to make sure that he knew messing with me was the wrong call. The first thing I did was make sure the lake was secure because I didn't want any more floods happening. While it would have been sweet to go and flood his side and have it destroyed some of his property, I didn't want to be liable. Instead, I decided to build a fence around the entire lake, and nobody but my family could access it now. The lake had been being used by everyone until now, but I was denying him access since it was mine now. He was angry and yelled at me, but I reminded him where the property line was and that I would make sure he was arrested if he crossed it. I am guessing that his sons had at least a little more sense than he did because they got him inside the house before he could take me up on that. He got hit with fines for damaging a 100-year-old tree and trespassing onto my property that he had to pay. In the meantime, I am spending a lot of time making sure my yard is as good as I can make it. Growing flowers, vegetables, and even new trees that in time will help replace those mighty oaks that he felt like killing for no real reason. I can enjoy my lake in peace knowing that there is nothing he can do about. I can see when it's hot his family looking at the lake and wishing they could still use it as a nice way to cool off, but I don't feel bad. That fence was the best revenge for me because at the end he clearly got the opposite of what he wanted. He wanted to destroy it on my side so only he could have the lake, and now he gets none of it. Greed can sometimes make you end up with nothing, and you can never be too old to learn that lesson. The next story is titled, "Got Pissy and Damaged My Car, Got Her a £2,000 Fine, Her Car Crushed and Her Tenancy Put into Question." I live in a maisonette house in the UK, a 4 in a block. And the only parking is on street. I recently got my license and put onto a parent's insurance to keep costs low. That's where this story starts. I have this neighbor who is an awful driver. Crashed at least 2 cars, and who also fly tip abandoned rubbish in their gardens, blocking our fire escape. This is all relevant information. I parked my car outside one day, on street parking. And she pulled up right behind me, blasted her horn and started swearing at me to move out of her space. Opened my door and threatened to smash my car up. I locked my car and went inside ignoring her. I looked out the window and she parked her car on my bumper, then placed another car she owns on my other bumper, causing slight paint damage and making sure I couldn't get to work the next day. This continued for a few weeks, her parking right on my car, or parking her 2 cars over 4 spaces. Keep in mind, I own my house and she rents hers, meaning we have parking rights over her due to having the parking passes. I had enough of this after a while. I ran the license plate for both of her cars through a website that tells you the MO status of a vehicle, car 1. Moded. Car 2 MO expired. What this basically means is the car cannot be driven or even on public land. And I had the information I wanted. I called up the council, whose authority it is to report the car, and told them about an abandoned vehicle parked outside my house, on restricted parking times. They got back to me and told me they had passed it on to the police. I then decided to phone her landlord about her fly tipping in the back garden. He came, spoke to me, and my parents investigated and put her lease into contest because she had blocked our escape route and left the stuff abandoned. I kept calling about the car, every day for about a month, until one day she moved the car to another car park around the corner, again onto public land. I reported it again, this time with evidence it had moved. The council arrived that day and stuck a ticket on it saying that they were made aware the vehicle was abandoned and the owner had to contact them to get it moved. Today, I woke up and saw a note taped on the car saying that the vehicle will be crushed in 7 days if she doesn't respond to them, and the car has an outstanding fine of £1,872.82 and it will increase if this action is taken. Meaning she calls them or gets it crushed. Safe to say I don't think she will damage my car or swear at me again. I also don't think in future she will ignore the council's calls for her to respond to them. The last story is titled, "Let Your Pets Roam Free, Shitting on Everyone's Yard and Breeding with Reckless Abandon?" Not on Grandma's watch. TLDR. Trashy neighbors cause a huge uptick in stray animals and their waste but don't want to be held responsible for it. My grandma rallies the block and everyone spreads cayenne pepper in their yard to keep their animals away. The animals end up shitting so much on their property that, after a tip, Parks and Rec calls animal control and a city inspector, who slaps the trashy neighbors with a multitude of fat fines, take the pets, and causes them to move away. Remember this after reading a post about someone else dealing with neighbors who wouldn't clean up their dog's shit. I'm only partially involved. Was staying with her at the time to save money. The bulk of this revenge was carried out by my grandma. So quick relevant info to understand the neighborhood. At the end of the street there's a really large park that has a river in it. The street curves at this end almost like a cul-de-sac, but where the middlemost house would sit as a walking lane into the park. At the other end of our street, maybe 15 or so houses total, is the main road. On to the story. So my grandparents moved back to our city to live in my grandma's childhood home. When she had been a kid, the area had been considered to be on the outskirts of town. Now it's all but inner city. About half of the families who had owned these houses had either sold them and moved away, or their kids lived there now. Either way, the majority of the block had known our family in some capacity for decades, and in general everyone tries to be neighborly. Of the 4 or so houses that had new residents in them, one in particular immediately started getting on my grandma's nerves: the people across from us in the cul-de-sac. Initially, it wasn't their attitude or anything along those lines that caused a problem, they just began tearing the property up. They'd start some project to fix something, then either give up or make it worse. The house was 2 different colors. The awning over the carport was sagging terribly. The yard was almost always overgrown with random shit everywhere. On top of that, they'd blast their music really loud at night, which sucked for their elderly neighbor, grandma's old friend Ms. Ruth, and also asked for weird shit. E.g., they asked us if they could run a power cord from our house across the street to power a generator being used in their backyard. WTF. It really bothered my grandma because that used to be her best friend's house and it had always been one of the nicest on the block. As time went on though, shit started getting out of hand. Soon they started hauling tons of junk into the backyard. Again, not a big deal, until there's literal bathtubs and toilets visible from the street on your property. Our side porch faced directly at their house, and it was such an eyesore. Then we noticed they brought home a few pets, 3 dogs, 2 cats, who they promptly began leaving outside and let them roam around as they saw fit. Unfortunately, my city has a big problem with stray animals, and their pets weren't fixed, so after about a year and a half the block had a stupid amount of animals running about. The wild thing was that the family kept keeping so many of them rather than trying to give them away or something. They easily had 6 to 7 dogs and 8 to 9 cats filtering in and out of their backyard, all collared. Obviously all of these animals have to shit somewhere. Because they were across from us on the curved street end, there was only 2 houses in between us going clockwise, with the bike lane to the park in between those houses, and both of those houses had rocks instead of grass in their front yards. Our house, however, had thick, lush, grade grass with some rose bushes here and there. My grandma was very proud of it. You can imagine where all their animals plus the strays liked to poop, and grandma was getting really sick of cleaning animal shit. Now at this point, no one has really addressed this animal issue with the neighbors, but everyone on the block who had grass in their front yard was talking about them. Finally, my grandma woke up to find one of their cats taking a shit on her windshield and 2 of their dogs in our backyard in her vegetable patch they had dug under our fence at night. She chased them off our property and we watched them promptly run into their front door. Grandma was lit. She walks up to the porch, yells, "Excuse me," into the open front door, and waits for someone to come out. The dad comes out and they start talking. After a few minutes though it escalates into yelling, at which point some of the neighbors are watching too. I see my grandma disengage and start walking back to the house while I'm standing on the porch waiting to bask in this early morning popcorn. He apparently apologized for his animals being on her property, but got mad when she asked him what he was going to do to make sure it didn't happen again. He tried to say that it was unreasonable for her to expect him to keep track of his outdoor animals when he and the other adults living there were at work. When she asked if he could keep them inside when no one was home, he replied, "No, they'd make a mess of my house," and that she was throwing a fit over a little poop. Grandma says don't worry about it, she has a plan, she just has to wait until the weather is right. Fast forward 2 months, it's June, July. We live in South Texas, so that means no rain, no clouds, just blinding 95 plus heat until sunset. She asks me one day if I can help her with some yard work. I'm like, yeah, of course, let's do it, but she says we have to go shopping first. We roll into the store and grab 4 to 5 large canisters of cayenne pepper and regular pepper, and that's when she starts telling me the plan. If you sprinkle cayenne pepper in your yard, it'll deter cats and dogs from pooping in it because it irritates their nose. You can't just dump a ton of it though, or you can hurt the animals' pads, and it's useless if it ends up raining because it'll get washed away. She had been waiting for high summertime to pull this off. We put on masks and safety glasses, then proceeded to cover the front and back yard with the pepper mix after sunset. I noticed 2 or 3 other people on the block doing similar things and mentioned it to my grandma, who just replies, "Oh, I know." She had already talked to everyone on the block and suggested they all do this at around the same time to maximize the effect. All 13 plus families were on board. 2 or 3 days pass, with more and more families pepper dusting their yards, and the random animal turds in our yard have dropped off significantly. I think we found 1 or 2 way at the edge of the driveway, while now the bulk of the animals have started shitting everywhere on the douchebag neighbor's property. They're even just shitting in the driveway and on the sidewalk outside the house. The smell was so bad, but we had a front row seat to watch them constantly have to tiptoe around piles of poop. We keep this up for about 2.5 weeks, replenishing the pepper mix every 4 to 5 days, watching them clean all the crap up before work only to come home, pull into the driveway and step right into a nice wet lump of shit. They'd always eyeball us from across the street, but they didn't say anything. The entire block is laughing behind their back. Eventually, Grandma called the Department of Parks and Recreation and leaves an anonymous tip claiming that she felt she could no longer safely access the park because of the high population of stray animals and unsanitary level of fecal matter near the entrance. They did a drive-by, saw the house, and immediately rang up animal control and a city inspector. The house looked borderline condemned and definitely smelled like it. Turns out you're only allowed 8 pets on your property here, and these people had over double that. They ended up losing all the animals, who went to no-kill shelters, had to pay a thick fine and also got busted for a variety of building permit violations. They eventually moved, a new family bought the house, and are really great neighbors in every way. Grandma is also back to being very proud of her succulent lawn. Thank you for listening.